Hi everyone, it's Jen again. Hope you all had a good week. This week was the official start of OtomeJam 2025, so it has always been in my plans that Esper X Guide would be, I would create a demo for OtomeJam, and I knew because I was going to be having this travel system and battle system that I would have to get an early start on that if I was going to be able to create a demo that I feel would encapsulate the, I guess, the essence of the story that I wanted to tell. So I was planning on jumping right into the meat and potatoes of the game by having the player go through like the first dungeon that would have the 3 enemies, an optional boss, and just kind of get the player's feet wet into the world, the role of the Esper and the role of the guide, and how the general like flow of conversation along with exploration, for those who are not familiar with my other games, will go along with the introduction of a new combat system. So I knew that was going to be a lot to tackle, and I was hoping to get my combat system done and my map and travel systems done before the start of OtomeJam, so that OtomeJam itself I could just focus on the character world building, story, and the story character sprites. So that's where I'm at, and I'm a little bit ahead of schedule from what I was originally thinking because I'm pretty happy with the GUI. While I was planning out the GUI, I was also planning on how I was going to set up my conversation sprites, and I decided to go ahead and use the same base for both the in-person conversations and what I'm labeling as the communicator conversations, where they're kind of talking to you through this like little pop-up window. As I wanted it to kind of have a little bit of this like, I don't know, fantasy retro technology feel to it, like that feels a little bit more like, I guess, analog than digital, and that there's like some static, and yeah, I don't know. I think it'll be easier to like kind of just see what I'm aiming for than to try to describe it. So I have this phenomenon, I guess, where when I'm planning out these things, I have like this equal amount of like excitement for what it is I'm planning on working on, and then I also have like a sense of anxiety around it, that I usually don't plan for things that like I have no clue on like how to approach it. Like I usually have some idea of how I'm gonna approach something, but until I actually start working on it, I won't know how good like my theory, my theoretical approach is. So unless it's something that I've already done before, that I'm going to be just like kind of hopping into a workflow, I usually have like equal amounts of like, I guess maybe like excitement and dread for it. And yeah, that's how I felt about like wanting to make these communication sprites, because I wanted to create the layers and create the animation in a way that I know I was going to be able to set up the sprites for later. So it was going to be like a head to mid-thigh to knees kind of sprite, because in the visual novel kind of format where you have like the text box usually at the bottom, you can count on like that 1/3, 1/4 of the screen, the lower portion of the screen, like pretty much like being gone. But I like to use like these semi-transparent text boxes, so I want to have like some art of the character still extending down that far. So I know that if I have a sprite that is shown from like the knees up, then that will give me plenty of room to showcase enough of the character, have them be a good size ratio to the rest of the screen. So when I was building my character, I was creating that with creating it with that in mind, but also making it oversized so that I would have the flexibility to like zoom in or shrink it down depending on how I want it to be framed. So working in Procreate, for anybody who's familiar with Procreate, it has a limited amount of layers that it will let you work in depending on how much RAM you have. I do have an iPad Pro with the 8 gigs of RAM. I had to go look it up because I wasn't quite sure. I think maybe the newest models of the iPad Pro, you can get up to like double that, like 16 gigs of RAM. By the time that I got mine, 8 was the most that you could get. And I would say like for most illustration uses of Procreate, you wouldn't need that many layers, but since I do animation and I also prepare sprites for animation, where they're gonna have like many different parts, like I think I use like maybe around like 10 layers for the eyes alone, and that's after they've been flattened as far as like the line work, the flats, the renders. So while I'm working on the eyes, I might have up to like, I don't know, I might have up to like over 50 layers just for the eyes before I flatten them. So yeah, I need a lot of layers. So there's got to be kind of a balance between the size that I work and having the available RAM that I need for the number of layers. I sometimes do switch over to copying that file to a new file if I start to run out of room even after I flatten. So that is something that I also do. So preparing these sprites, I was like waking up in the middle of the night. I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night anyways, but while I was waking up in the middle of the night, I would be thinking about how I'm gonna plan out these sprites, and I'm like thinking of like how I'm gonna create this opening screen effect that I want to have, where it's just like, oh, it's connecting and it's gonna have this like little frame like very quickly open up, and like the screen will display and it'll show like the character talking, and then when they sign out, it'll like be like zip, and it like the window will like shrink and disappear, and it'll all be very fast, that like the player is not gonna necessarily be like aware, even like really registering that that's what's happening, like much in the sense like when we interact with our interfaces, how it gives all these little like animations that we're not even always aware of, that just kind of imply user interaction to give the user some sense of like feedback. A lot of times like buttons will like expand and shrink, or you know, they'll have some type of animations built into them to like show that, hey, this is what's active, or this is what you've activated, or you know, this is what you're interacting with. That gives it just that extra level of like life in some ways than if it's just a static image. So that's what I wanted to kind of add as a detail. For whatever reason, it was like really strong in my mind that that's what I wanted to have. And I didn't know how I was going to make it, and so my brain is like going over like, well, maybe I'll make it in where I have like the frame, but I want the frame to be at 100% opacity, but I want the screen to be at like 80% opacity, but I want the character model to also be at like 80% opacity, but I also wanted to have like this kind of gray green filter over it. So how am I going to layer all these things when like the animation program I use doesn't recognize like certain, well, it doesn't recognize really any like filters, so like it can do opacity but it can't do like, like in Photoshop I would just use like a color filter or something to give it more of a green hue or something, because I don't want to have to make the artwork twice. I want to be able to use like the character standardized colors and just do like an alteration of it. So I'm trying to think of like how I'm gonna recreate these effects in RenPy, along with like when I call up these different layers, like if I put the kind of static background and the character sprite on separate layers and they're at a certain level of transparency, then you're going to be able to see one through the other, and I don't know if that's like the effect that I want. Just stuff like that. And when you start displaying things, like when you start mixing up the built-in character sprites along with like the screens, the screens always want to be on top, so you might have to go in there and like make adjustments to how RenPy is doing the screen, the layer hierarchy and stuff like that. So as I was like kind of ruminating about how I wanted this to happen, because certain things needed to loop and certain things didn't. So like I needed to have when the box opens, that part needs to not loop, but then it needs to go into the character sprite animation, which is gonna loop. And then when it goes into the box closing, like that part we don't want to loop either. So figuring out how to do all that timing, with what formats that I wanted to use, like was something I was really racking my brain about. This very simple problem of like having a box opening animation and then going into whatever expression animation and then having that box do a closing animation. Like very simple what I wanted to achieve, but it became like this problem that I was just thinking of at all hours of the night. And I knew I was going to be tackling that problem like yesterday, because I already had my sprite drawn and prepared. I had the expressions, I had the layers flattened and rescaled, like ready to go, ready to start animating in Anime FX. But I just needed to figure out like how I was going to program these, because that was going to be like that was going to affect like how I end up like exporting these files and all that. So I ended up going with maybe the simplest route. Maybe the simplest route is always like the easiest in the end. I ended up going with just using the character sprites with ATL animations, where when you use the built-in transitions, like dissolve is what I ended up using, there's enough of a delay between the show sprites that I can just show the opening box animation and then show characters with dissolve and then show character sprite animation with dissolve, and one will go seamlessly into the other, and then I can go right into the looping, and then when the conversation closes I can go into the I can go into the close box animation with dissolve, and then I can just hide it immediately afterwards, and that also ended up being seamless. So thank you RenPy for the built-in dissolve transition, because it made my problem so much more simpler than like what I was like trying to overcomplicate things in my head. Why am I telling this story? Is because I guess one of the things that like people start to notice around this time, where I'm starting a new project and it looks like I'm being like very prolific because it's all this like new code, new sprites, new backgrounds, new aesthetic, new everythings. I sometimes get people asking me like, how do you do all this, or like you're so dedicated, or you're so disciplined, or any of those things. It's like, for me it's not even like a choice. It's like a 3 a.m. obsession. So of like, how do I make this like animation of this opening box and like closing it? And obviously I've been thinking about this since 3 a.m. So by the time I get up at like 6:30, 7 o'clock, what do I want to do? I want to work on this box until I get it working, which is what I proceeded to do. From pretty much like 7 o'clock was like animating the sprite and creating the box animation and putting that together in a very opening scene that I'm going to show at the end here. That I did about until like, I took a lunch break, I took a walk the dog break. I was probably working on this from morning until about like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, where then I started like going in and refining it with some sound effects, the voice cues. And then I just took the rest of the day off, like probably around 4 o'clock. I just, made sure everybody was fed with dinner and chatted with some friends and read and watched YouTube and laid in bed. Went to bed early, I think, like around maybe between 7 and 8, like a true grandma. So when I say that I wake up and I'm like thinking about things at 3 a.m. or whatever, I'm not being sleep deprived because I go to bed like super early when that happens. Seldom do I stay up past like 10 or 11. Because I do have a tendency of like waking up like normally, naturally. That's my biological clock. So again, it's not like being disciplined. I'm not working myself. It's just what I want to do. It's what I want to do for myself. So maybe for you, game dev is also that thing that you just want to work on. It comes naturally. It's enjoyable. You love the challenge. You're thinking about it whenever you can. And then it's really not that hard to make time for it because you find a way. And then the hardest part is pretty much just like not making time for it, like still remembering all your obligations and taking breaks to walk the dog, take a bath, stretch, eat healthy. Those sorts of things become more the challenge than doing the game dev. And if game dev isn't that for you, then maybe, if you're interested in something, but you're more interested in just having a result than you are the process, then there might be something out there for you that's more enjoyable for the process in itself that you haven't discovered yet. Because having something that you enjoy doing just for the end product, to me, in this life is not enough. You spend 99% of the time doing it than finishing it. So I think that 99% should be enjoyable. That should be something that you are excited to wake up in the morning, that you should be thinking about at 3 a.m. Well, maybe not for you, if that's not your sleep schedule, but you get my idea. So keep looking. Keep your mind open to trying different things to find that spark. All right. Looking forward to an upcoming week of fleshing out the story, the characters more. I'm going to be working on another character sprite and hopefully be getting some new voice lines by the end of the week. So by the end of next week, I hope to have another character implemented. The one that has the blank screen at the beginning. Yes, that character should be showing their face and their voice. So that's my plans going forward, and hope you have a nice rest of your weekend and another good, exciting upcoming week. Take care. Don't forget to enjoy the process. Bye.
Agent Ember. Aw. Right. Ah.